All right, buckle up, everyone, because today's deep dive, well, it's a bit of a chilly one. We're looking at The Last Green Dawn, this story where humanity tries to hit the brakes on climate change, but ends up sending things into a terrifying new crisis. So picture this. It's Earth, but pushed to the absolute limit. We're talking devastating storms, crazy heat waves, you name it. What would it take at that point for us as a species to say, okay, enough's enough? What risks would we be willing to take? And that's the question at the core of The Last Green Dawn. In this story, the answer they land on is geoengineering. Basically, it's like they decide to do some extreme home renovation. But instead of a fresh coat of paint, they're talking about giant mirrors in space, factories that suck carbon out of the air like crazy. Oh, and they even start tinkering with the clouds themselves.
And, the funny thing is, it's not even entirely science fiction. I mean, some of these technologies are being researched right now. We even have pilot programs for some of them, though obviously nothing on that scale yet.
Right, of course. But in the story, they go all in, full-on planetary fixer-upper project. And what could possibly go wrong with that, right?
Well, that's where The Last Green Dawn takes this sharp turn. The crazy thing is, in the story, these technologies, they actually work. Temperatures start to drop, no more crazy disasters for a while. But then, well, everyone starts to realize something's not quite right.
Yeah, I'm already getting the chills just thinking about it. It's like that old saying, be careful what you wish for, right? But let's get specific. What does this new normal even look like in the story? Paint me a picture. If we were living in The Last Green Dawn, what are the signs that should have us running for the hills?
Well, one of the first things the author highlights is this shift in the sunsets. They start to take on this really strange green color, almost sickly.
Okay, see, that's just creepy. Is there actually any science to back that up? Or is that more of an artistic liberty thing?
Believe it or not, there is some scientific basis for it. When you change what the atmosphere is made of, even a little, like with aerosol injections, for example, it changes how light moves through it. We've actually seen this kind of thing happen after volcanic eruptions in the past. The sunsets can turn some pretty strange colors because of all the particles in the air.
So it's like a giant warning sign in the sky, like, hey, look, everyone, we messed up the atmosphere big time. Definitely gives me those, there's something in the air vibes and not the good kind. But it's more than just the sunsets, right? The whole environment starts to go haywire in the story.
Oh, absolutely. The author even describes the snow taking on this weird yellowish tint. And the air itself feels different, almost heavy. I mean, it's fictional, but it gets you thinking about how interconnected everything on Earth really is.
Right. Like they tried to adjust the thermostat and accidentally broke the planet. Talk about unintended consequences. But how realistic is any of this, really?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where does science fiction end and reality begin? I mean, the specific things that happened in The Last Green Dawn might be a little far-fetched. But the underlying message about unintended consequences, well, that's something we should definitely be taking seriously. We're still learning about how climate works, but one thing we do know is that even small changes can have these ripple effects that we never could have predicted.
It makes you wonder, is there even a safe way to start engineering something as complex as the Earth's climate? I mean, we can barely get the weather forecast right a week out, let alone try to control the entire planet. And in The Last Green Dawn, well, let's just say they find out the hard way just how badly things can go wrong. Those subtle warning signs, the weird sunsets, the strange feeling air that's just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Things are about to get a whole lot chillier. And when we come back, we'll unpack exactly what happens when those subtle environmental shifts turn into a full-blown climate catastrophe. So we left off with the planet in The Last Green Dawn on the verge of a serious downturn. Things are already getting weird, but now the real disaster hits. It's the moment of truth for these characters and for the whole geoengineering experiment. What happens when those subtle warning signs, those strange sunsets, turn into something much bigger? Well, in The Last Green Dawn, the answer is an ice age, and not the kind that creeps in over thousands of years. This one hits hard and fast in a matter of years.
That's one of the things I find so unsettling about the story, that sense of urgency. I mean, we tend to think of climate change as this gradual thing, right? But what The Last Green Dawn reminds us is that Earth's systems, they can change incredibly fast. And once those changes are set in motion, there's no hitting the pause button.
It's like we're messing with a delicate balance, not just turning a dial up or down.
Exactly. It's more like we're playing with forces we barely understand.
Yeah.
And the scary part is once we cross certain thresholds, there's no going back.
So what does this new world, this ice age world look like in the story? I mean, beyond just needing a really, really warm coat, because I'm guessing it's not just about the temperature dropping.
No, the author paints a picture of a world completely transformed. Think deserts that used to be scorching hot, now completely encased in ice. Snow falling in places that used to be tropical paradises.
And amidst all this chaos, all this environmental upheaval, there are still people trying to survive. What happens to them? How do they cope?
Well, that's where The Last Green Dawn goes from being a cautionary tale to a really human story. Resources become scarce. Communities that were once strong start to fracture. People are forced to make impossible choices just to survive.
It's that age-old question, isn't it? What would you do to survive? What lines would you be willing to cross? What parts of yourself would you be willing to sacrifice?
Absolutely. And The Last Green Dawn doesn't shy away from those questions. It forces us to confront not just what could happen to the planet, but also what could happen to us, to humanity.
It's a terrifying thought, but an important one. And it's not even the end of the story. Because on top of the climate catastrophe, on top of the fight for survival, The Last Green Dawn throws another curveball our way. And it's a big one. The possibility that this whole thing, this ice age, wasn't an accident at all. Yeah, you heard that right. We're talking about a conspiracy. And we'll dive into that right after the break. All right, so we've got this planet on ice, a desperate fight for survival. And to make matters even worse, there's a chance this whole thing was no accident. That's right, we're talking about a conspiracy. So spill the beans. What's the deal with this conspiracy? Who knew what and when?
Well, the story reveals that there was this group, and they knew about the risks of the Geo-Engineering project. They knew that it could backfire, that it could trigger an ice age, but they went ahead with it anyway.
Wait, hold on. They knew. They knew they were risking the entire planet, and they just went for it. Why? What could possibly justify that kind of risk?
It's a tough question, and honestly, there are no easy answers. The story explores a couple of possibilities, and none of them are pretty. One idea is that this group, they were so convinced that they were right. They thought, look, the world is on the brink. We have to do something drastic, even if it meant sacrificing a lot of people along the way.
So not only were they playing God with the planet, but they were choosing who got to survive. That's pretty dark.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about what's acceptable, even in a crisis. Where do you draw the line between what's necessary and what's just plain wrong?
Right, like, even with the best intentions, sometimes the road to hell really is paved with, well, But was it just about saving the world, even if it meant sacrificing a part of it? Or was there something else going on, something even more sinister?
That's the thing. The story doesn't let them off the hook that easily, because it also suggests that this group, they might have had another motive altogether.
Power.
So it wasn't enough to save the world. They wanted to rule it too.
In a way, yes. They saw this crisis, this ice age, as an opportunity to reshape the world in their image.
It's like that old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Exactly. And that's one of the most chilling aspects of The Last Green Dawn. It's not just a story about a climate catastrophe. It's a story about human fallibility, about how even with the best intentions, we can mess things up. And how power can corrupt even the best of us. It's a lot to process, that's for sure. But even though it's work to fiction, The Last Green Dawn feels incredibly relevant today. So, as we wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways you hope listeners will walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of humility. We need to remember that we don't have all the answers when it comes to the planet, and that even our best efforts to fix things can have unintended consequences. We need to be cautious, but we also need to be bold.
It's a tough balance to strike, for sure. But that's kind of the challenge we're facing, isn't it? Finding that balance between action and caution, between hope and realism. Well, on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into The Last Green Dawn. It's been a chilling, thought-provoking journey, and I want to thank you for joining us. Remember, the choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow, so let's make sure we choose wisely. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay warm out there.